crises we are facing. And the requested resources do not meet the realities of the threats we face or the pressing needs of the department. The proposed budget requests a reduction in funding for CISA when compared to what they received in the omnibus spending bill, and proposes funding to modernize screening at our airports that would take 17 years to fully implement. By the time you implement that, the products will be obsolete. This void between reality and this budget request is even more apparent in its response, or lack thereof, to the crisis at the southern border. March marked a 13th straight month of over 150,000 encounters, a trend never before recorded. Cumulatively, Customs and Border Protection has had more than 2 million encounters at the southern border since President Biden took office, and already over 1 million encounters 6 months into this year. More than 15 months into this administration, there are some unadulterable and truly troubling facts. One, we had the highest number of border encounters in the past 20 years in March 2022, 221,000 people. Number two, as was most recently reported, last year, 23 people whose names appear on a U.S. terror watch list were stopped for illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. Those were only ones we knew about. Those aren't the ones we know got away, because the chances are many more got through. And number three, Customs and Border Protection seized enough fentanyl in 2021 to kill 2.4 billion people, over 7 times the U.S. population. Again, that's only what we seize, and it stands to reason that much more is getting through. And in fact, we know it is, because this year marks a very terrible milestone. It's the first time in our nation's history that more than 100,000 people have died of drug overdoses. And the vast majority of those drugs are coming across the southern border, and our policies of this administration are making it that much easier for those drugs to get across. Unfortunately, President Biden and Vice President Harris's approach to the southern border has not changed, and therefore neither has a problem. In fact, it's only gotten worse. Mr. Secretary, on a trip to the southern border a few months ago, you were quoted as saying, "It's worse now than, frankly, it has been in at least 20 years, if not ever." I couldn't agree more. On top of these record-breaking numbers, the Biden administration earlier this month announced that Title 42 removals will end May 23rd. The DHS Office of Immigration Statistics projects that the U.S. Border Patrol could see up to 18,000 encounters a day once Title 42 is lifted. 18,000 a day. We're seeing 7,000 now, and it's already a crisis. There is no question that this will cause Customs and Border Protection to lose operational control over the southern border. And yet, the Department of Justice has decided to appeal the decision to lift the mask mandate for aviation and public transportation systems. And I fail to see the logic behind repealing the use of Title 42 and yet arguing to reinstate a mask mandate in public transportation. How do you balance those two? How do you reconcile those two? They're diametrically opposed, and they're both politically instilled. At the very least, this mixed messaging confuses the American public. I'd like to join many of my colleagues, increasingly even on both sides of the aisle, in calling on the President to reverse the decision to lift Title 42 until the Department has solidified a plan to deal with the impending surge. I was at the border just 2 weeks ago for about the 6th time since I became ranking member, and I can tell you there certainly is no real plan for what is about to happen, at least according to the Customs and Border Protection folks and everyone else who works down there. This has left many of our frontline law enforcement at the border worried and more overwhelmed than they already have been. They, along with many state and local law enforcement officers along the border, feel completely abandoned by this administration and this department. Mental health issues with our Customs and Border Protection folks are at an all-time high. In fact, another Customs and Border Protection agent took his life Sunday. That's the reality of what we're dealing with. The stress that they're dealing with is unconscionable. What we're going through now is a self-inflicted disaster, but there are simple steps that the Department of Homeland Security and this administration can take now to deal with the crisis at the border. Protect Title 42. Effectively reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy and stop fighting it tooth and nail. Use already appropriated funding to continue building the border wall, and end pull factors that you have created that are making migrants from all over the world, not just the Northern Triangle, not just Mexico. In fact, 70% from people outside that area are coming to this country now. That's a pull factor that this administration has created. Homeland Security Republicans have multiple bills that have not been marked up by this committee that we believe are common sense solutions and can help. I have a bill, the Border Security for America Act, and several of my other colleagues, including Representatives Meyer, Guest, and Higgins, have introduced bills that provide relief for the situation at the border. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for holding this hearing today. I very much appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, I thank you for appearing before us today. Look forward to your testimony, and I look forward to the questions from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I yield back.
Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. Members are also reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in our February 3rd, 2021 colloquy regarding remote procedures. I now welcome our witness, Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. Without objection, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I'll now ask the Secretary to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you today. Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, I join you in mourning the loss of Guardsman Bishop Evans, as does the entire country. Every day, the 250,000 extraordinary personnel of the Department of Homeland Security interact with the public on a daily basis more than any other federal agency. While created to respond to a singular threat in the aftermath of 9/11, our department has remained agile, adapting to new challenges as they arise, as responsibilities grow, and as our community partners. 5, target and disrupt transnational criminal organizations and human smugglers. And 6, deter irregular migration south of our border in partnership with other federal agencies and nations. We inherited a broken and dismantled system that is already under strain. It is not built to manage the current levels and types of migratory flows. Only Congress can fix this. Yet we have effectively managed an unprecedented number of non-citizens seeking to enter the United States and interdicted more drugs and disrupted more smuggling operations than ever before. A significant increase in migrant encounters will strain our system even further, and we will address this challenge successfully. But it will take time, and we need the partnership of Congress, state and local officials, NGOs, and communities to do so. To build on our ongoing work in this budget, we have requested funding to hire 300 new Border Patrol agents, the first increase since 2011, to ensure the safe and humane treatment of migrants and to operationalize a new rule on asylum processing. We are requesting additional funds to counter human and drug smuggling operations, combat the heinous crimes of child exploitation and human trafficking, and stop goods produced by forced labor from entering our markets. Finally, our mission set includes a series of other essential priorities. DHS, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, protects our critical infrastructure from malicious cyber activity, a threat heightened due to Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Our budget will expand our cybersecurity services, bolster our ability to respond to cyber intrusions, and grow our cyber operational planning activities. DHS, through TSA, protects the traveling public. Our budget invests in paying TSA's dedicated personnel commensurate with their federal colleagues and ensuring they receive employment protections. DHS, through FEMA and other agencies, continues to answer the risks posed by climate change and natural disasters growing in ferocity and frequency. Our budget invests in adaptation, resilience, improved response, and recovery, and more. We cannot do this alone. DHS is a department of partnerships. I look forward to working with this committee to carry out our wide-ranging mission on behalf of the American people. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary for his testimony. I remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the witnesses. It's my understanding that because we expect votes, I'm going to adhere to that 5-minute rule very strictly. I'll now recognize myself for questions. Mr. Secretary, in your testimony, you discussed how the 2 decades since 9/11, the homeland threat picture has shifted dramatically from foreign terrorists to domestic terrorists, and particularly racially motivated violent extremists who present the most lethal threat to the homeland. What is your current assessment of the domestic terrorism threat to our country?
Mr. Chairman, it is our assessment that domestic violent extremism poses the greatest terrorism-related threat to our homeland. And we have taken a number of steps in the Department of Homeland Security to meet this consequential challenge. First, our Office of Intelligence and Analysis created a separate section in its office to focus on this particular threat stream. Second, we have disseminated an unprecedented number of intelligence and information products to state and local law enforcement so that they are equipped to recognize and address the challenge in their respective jurisdictions. We also created the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnership, we call it CP3, to equip and resource communities to recognize and address the challenge within their boundaries. We believe that empowerment of local communities and state and local law enforcement is the best vehicle to address this challenge today.
Thank you. Recently, a number of historically black colleges and universities, as well as religious institutions, receive threats. What is the department doing to address this type domestic violence extremism in America?
Mr. Chairman, a few weeks ago, I had a meeting with presidents of historically black colleges and universities, and a few weeks ago, I met with faith-based institutions in Detroit, Michigan, to hear from them with respect to the resources they need, the challenges they confront, how they can make their respective institutions welcoming at the same time as secure. And one of the key takeaways was, again, the need for increased funding through the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which this committee has historically supported, and we are appreciative of that, and to make sure that those grant dollars, those critical grant dollars, are accessible to all, even those that might not have the resources or infrastructure to otherwise access our programs. And equality of access and ease of access are core principles of ours, and we are working to strengthen our operations in that regard.
Thank you. Now, the department is charged with securing the homeland, not just the border. You've released 12 priorities across DHS's mission space to guide your strategic focus through 2022. Can you please share with the committee the highlights of these priorities and how they will advance the department's critical mission?
Mr. Chairman, we set out, I published 12 priorities for the department. I did so in March of this year. 6 of the priorities are focused on advancement of the organization as an institution, and 6 are mission specific. I can give some examples of the critical priorities. Increase the integration and effectiveness of the department as an organization. Harness technology. Ensure that we are not only espousing but critically implementing the core principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and opportunity throughout our workforce, including at all levels of leadership. In the mission-specific area, and these are just but a few examples. Of course, fighting transnational criminal organizations and smuggling operations to better secure our border, fighting terrorism and targeted violence, combating human smuggling and child exploitation. These are some of the 12 priorities that I identified, and we develop them in collaboration with leadership throughout the department in an inclusive and open way.
Thank you very much. Chair yields back. Recognize ranking member from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you again for your testimony today. And, when you were speaking, I was thinking of what I view as two of the major threats to this country right now from a homeland standpoint. One of them being the cybersecurity threat, which is quite substantial. The only thing I can say about that is I think you're doing a pretty good job, and the administration is doing a pretty decent job with cybersecurity. I wish a budget would reflect more funding for CISA, which I think they need more than what they're getting in their funding package, but they're going in the right direction, and I'm happy for that. The other threat I think about is the border, and I think it's a very substantial threat. And I've spoken to the rank and file agents and officers on the front lines of border crisis again and again, and they have consistently and repeatedly told me they are overwhelmed and understaffed. Border Patrol agents have also told me that once Title 42 authority ends, there will be an even bigger surge of migrants attempting to cross, in fact, unprecedented surges, and they will lose operational control of some or all of the southwest border, notions that you yourself have acknowledged as well. Well, according to a Department of Homeland Security document, once Title 42 restrictions are lifted, federal law enforcement are bracing for encounters of up to 18,000 migrants per day. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit that document for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. Secretary Mayorkas, do you believe frontline agents and officers who consistently say that they are poised to lose operational control or some or all of America's southern border once Title 42 is lifted?
Ranking Member Katko, it is our responsibility to maintain operational control of the border. That is what our personnel are dedicated to doing. That is what the personnel throughout the department and I, as the Secretary, are dedicated to doing, and we will not lose operational control of the border.
So I just have 1 second, please. And I wanted to preface what I was saying earlier, and I should have done it. I apologize for that. We have a limited amount of time, and I've directed all of my committee members on my side of the aisle to ask pointed questions which generally require yes or no answers. And respectfully, if you don't answer the question directly, we will interrupt you. I just want to warn you of that. So the question is simply, so your answer is you don't believe we're going to lose operational control of the border, yes or no?
We will not lose operational control of the border, but Congressman, you have to allow me to answer fully the question.
No, I understand what you said. You'll have your opportunity, sir. But if you don't believe we're going to lose operational control of the border, what information do you have in your possession that your frontline agents don't have? Because there's not a single person on the border today that will tell you that once Title 42 is lifted, they won't lose operational control as part of the border. So what information do you have that they don't have?
The premise of your question and what you have identified as estimates of what we will encounter at the border are not estimates of what we will encounter. It is our responsibility.
That was a Homeland Security document that I had that from. So again, the question is, sir, is very simple. What information do you have in your possession that your frontline agents who risk their lives every day, and some of whom give their lives every day, don't have, that will tell you that you won't lose operational control to some of the border, at least when Title 42 is lifted?
We have a plan. We have a plan that we have developed and that we have been preparing to execute.
Your six-pillar plan?
Have been implementing since September of this past year.
Are you referring to your six-pillar plan?
Yes.
Has that been implemented, or is that a proposal?
That is underway in its execution. We began planning in September.
Let me ask you a question. That pillar, the 6 pillars. The surge started on January 20th when President Biden took office. Why didn't you implement the 6 pillars then? Why did you wait for 14 or 16 months to implement these things?
Many of these lines of effort have been underway since this administration began. And
I thought you just said that they're in the way of being implemented now.
And the challenge, Congressman, of migration is not a challenge that the United States faces alone. What we are experiencing is a migration challenge throughout the region, throughout the Western Hemisphere, and in fact, throughout the world. And that is why one of the pillars of the plan is to work with countries south of our border so that they manage their borders effectively.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I understand. But the bottom line is the 6 pillars came out yesterday.
Oh, and that is incorrect.
It was issued April 26, 2022 memorandum. I asked that you incorporate that to the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
The bottom line is the 6 pillars is something you put out yesterday to cover the fact that you guys are getting, you guys have lost operational control of many parts of the board already. More is to come. And I think I'd be straight with our folks going forward.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the young lady from Texas for 5 minutes, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Young lady is recognized.
Thank you. Let me welcome you, Mr. Secretary, and let me first of all hold up the document dated April 26, 2022. Thank the administration for recognizing the responsibilities we have at the border with increased personnel. Certainly our staffing at the border needs that kind of help. Increasing the processing efficiency, particularly interrupting the corrupt efforts of human smugglers, not creating the havoc of separating unaccompanied children or children from their families, or taking unaccompanied children so that almost 4,000 in the Trump administration that were separated, many of whom never got reunited, does not occur. I think it is also important to put on the record very quickly that the Order 42 from the CDC is not under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security. When I ask you a question, you might just simply say yes or no, whether it is. But let me move forward so that it's important to look at the funding. Let me quickly move forward on the question of the cyber. Grants were given up $1 billion for FEMA and CISA to partner with states to implement this grant program about shoring up their cybersecurity. Can you tell me whether this effort is going to help avoid the vicious intrusion that we've seen from Russia?
Congresswoman, thank you for your question. The grant funds that CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, has been given to distribute in collaboration with FEMA is a vital resource to equip others to strengthen their cybersecurity. In cybersecurity, we say that we are only as strong as our weakest link. So these grant dollars can be disseminated to really make sure that our weakest link is strengthened and the overall cybersecurity ecosystem is strengthened as a result. It's a vital.
Thank you so very much.
It's a vital tool.
Thank you. One of the grant sources that our urban areas, small and large, are committed to is the Urban Area Security Initiative. I noticed a decrease. Could you explain why there's a decrease on $22.5 million? Because of the desperate need that communities need to have this kind of Homeland Security grant.
What we are doing,
mitigating threats.
Yes, the Urban Area Security Initiative grants, the UASI grants as they are known, we have been well funded in that program, and we're very grateful for the funding that we have received. We're working with FEMA to make sure that those funds are effectively distributed, and we are giving greater latitude to law enforcement organizations throughout the country to identify the threats that they confront in their respective jurisdictions, while nevertheless providing them guidance with respect to the national security priority areas that we see, given our vantage point, to understand and appreciate the threats that the nation faces as a whole. It's been an instrumental grant program for us.
Thank you very much. I have the last two questions. If you can take note of them, because I will not be able to come back as my time is running out. First of all, I join Chairman Thompson in my strong support for funding for nonprofits, churches, and others under the threat of domestic terrorism, particularly HBCUs, of which I represent Texas Southern University, and in the neighborhood is Purview A&M. That is absolutely imperative. I'll just make that as a statement. I'd like to discuss with you further about that as relates to the bomb threats. But I also want to raise a matter of the TSA. Hope that the administration can really strongly support the chairman's legislation about professionalizing TSA. But a matter of concern has come to my attention regarding TSA airport screening and transgender persons. Air travel is an essential means of long distance travel. And so I want to know about any training dealing with screening issues for persons who are transgender, and how has the agency conducted the outreach to the transgender community? Is a practice of TSA to enter gender selection prior to passengers entering screening? If you could answer that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll look forward to talking to you about the hurricane season that is coming in our region. Mr. Secretary?
Congresswoman, we have developed advanced technology to improve and strengthen our screening at airports through TSA, and that does not require identification of one's gender, and so that it is sensitive to gender issues. Its focus was on innovating and strengthening our security screening, and doing so with sensitivities that you've identified.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, you and I have known each other for a while, and I must say this is painful for me. I've been dealing with the border since 9/11, as have you. You were a U.S. attorney in a border state, as was I. I've dealt with the border since 9/11 as a federal prosecutor, but also as a chairman of this very committee. And I would have to say that I've never seen the border more broken. It is not under operational control. It is out of control. And don't take my word for it. When I looked at the findings of the court, the cause is not climate change or some weird migration phenomena. It is the fact that on day one, your administration rescinded the migrant protection protocols and remained in Mexico because you didn't like the former president. And that's fine, but don't rescind what was working. This program was working, and the courts said that. Their findings of fact were that the migrant protection protocol program was decreasing the volume of inadmissible aliens arriving in the United States on land from Mexico. Further, they said the termination of MPP has contributed to the current border surge. Most importantly, your own Assistant Secretary for Border and Immigration Policy, David Shalahoon, said, since MPP's termination, the number of enforcement encounters on the southwest border has skyrocketed. This is your policy guy at DHS on border and immigration. He goes on to say, based on current trends, the department expects that total encounters this fiscal year are likely to be the highest ever recorded. I agree with him. The highest ever recorded. My state, we say every state's a border state. My state has to absorb this. And we have to pay billions of dollars when it's a federal responsibility. It's the biggest human trafficking event I've seen in my lifetime. 2.5 million encounters. What are we going to do with all these people that have no legal status in this country? Not to mention the fentanyls that have come in that can kill the population 7 times over. Not to mention the 23 apprehended that are on the terrorist watch list that you, sir, will not tell us who they are. I think the American people need to know who they are. I've never seen the morale of the Border Patrol this low, as demonstrated by the fact that when you, sir, and this is painful for me to say, when you visited down there, they turned their backs on you because they said you have turned their backs on them. It's hard for me to say this, sir, and I want to quote somebody that we both know. As you're looking at lifting Title 42, 18,000 per day, we're debating a $10 billion COVID relief package. What kind of COVID relief package is this? To open up the border to anybody that could come in that could be infected. Quote, this will overwhelm the communities at the border. It will overwhelm Border Patrol. The crisis will continue to get worse until we send the message that we will enforce border security. This is the wrong time to lift Title 42 as the surge in the summer occurs. Those are not my words. Those are the words of your former boss, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson. who I have tremendous respect for, and he's right about this, that this is a crisis. I hope the Supreme Court held the arguments yesterday on migrant protection protocol. I hope if they affirm the Fifth Circuit's decision that, sir, you will enforce the law as you're duty bound to do. Jay Johnson went on to say, if it was 1,000 apprehensions a day, that would be an okay number. But if it was above 1,000, that's a really bad number. And I knew I was going to be in a bad mood the whole day. And furthermore, he says, we need to send a strong message to the places where they're coming from. There's a right way and a wrong way to come into the United States. I agree. I agree with him. And to end, if I could just say that your responsibility by law is to protect the United States, both air, land, and sea. You have failed in this mission when it comes to our land border. And my state and our Texas Guardsmen that died saving 2 narco traffickers, you are complicit. The administration is complicit with the last leg of human trafficking because you end that trip. And I'll just close with this.
Gentlemen,
I must say, sir, with all due respect, I am disappointed.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And I would just like to start with, I hope our CPP Border Patrol officers would understand and continue to do their duty and not engage in political activity. To turn their back on the secretary is not helpful or fruitful at all. And I would hope that even if, when they don't agree with some of that, they understand their duty and continue to answer to the secretary and their leadership. Secretary Mayorkas, I'll get right into it. In recent months, we have seen threats to houses of worship increase, and I'm particularly concerned about the ongoing threats to houses of worship in the African American community. The Nonprofit Security Grant Program, or NSGP, is a key tool in helping houses of worship protect themselves from threats. For this reason, I was pleased to see the budget proposal request for $360 million for NSGP. Secretary Mayorkas, how is the department working to promote the program to African American community, including Black churches who need these resources?
Congressman, thank you very much for your important words regarding that grant program. We have engaged and embarked upon a very extensive communication effort to make sure that we reach otherwise disenfranchised institutions that very well might need those funds and otherwise could not access them. As I referenced earlier, I was in Detroit, Michigan, I believe it was last month, and met with faith-based groups in the African American community to understand the difficulties that they were having in accessing the grant program, the security needs that they had, and underscoring the importance of the resources that our grant program distributes. And so really it is all about engagement, the sharing of information, and improving access to this critical grant program.
Okay, well, I am going to be helping the churches in my area, my district, access that grant. And so working with you, I'd appreciate us partnering in helping us access those grants in my district and around the country. It is a group that has been left out of that process, and we need to bring them into it. So thank you. And also, how are you ensuring that FEMA can administer the program effectively and provide oversight to states as they play a key role in submitting the grant application to FEMA?
Congressman, we have a tremendous leader of FEMA in Deanne Criswell. The Deputy Administrator of FEMA, Eric Hooks, comes to the department with tremendous experience in actually managing a grant program and representing a state that is a recipient of a grant program. We are engaging extensively, as I mentioned before, with all communities, including minority communities, to make sure that our distribution of grant funds meets the Homeland Security imperatives and honors our obligation of equality of access.
Okay. Well, sir, I look forward to working with you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the Secretary's appearance here today. Mr. Secretary, what year were you born, sir?
1959.
1959. I was born in 61. We're from the same generation. Have you experienced failures in your life, sir, significant enough that you as a man over your 6 decades of life, you have a compass can help you measure failure? You know what it is as a man. I certainly do. There's no shame there. I'm asking you. It's an honest question.
Congressman, I'm 62 years old. Anyone who's lived for 62 years has confronted
Has experienced failure.
Different types of challenges, successes, and failures.
Yes, sir. And there's no shame in that. That's part of our journey in life. We get knocked down and we do our best to stand back up. So I'm going to try and help put this in perspective for you, sir. I've had harsh words for you over the last couple of years. You know that.
Oh, I've heard them. Yes, Congressman.
Yes, sir. I hope you feel my spirit right now. I'm also a compassionate man. And I feel that America needs you to own this thing. Good sir. Do you recognize the following statement? You wrote it, or someone for you wrote it. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the Department of Homeland Security has been executing a comprehensive and deliberate strategy to secure our borders and build a safe, orderly, and humane immigration system. Since January 2021, DHS has effectively managed an unprecedented number of non-citizens seeking to enter the United States. Effectively managed. You used that verbiage earlier today. Again, I suppose that's the tested and determined talking point. So I ask you, good sir, tell America, you're a gentleman, 62 years of age, a gentleman of distinguished accomplishment. You're Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Like all of us, you've experienced failure in the course of your life. You should have a compass to help you recognize it. This disaster we have at our border, the disintegration of our national sovereignty, cannot be sustained. Anyone that has two brain cells that could perhaps bump into each other would know that it's abject failure down there. So if you would identify our border as effectively managed right now, how would you identify failure? What would it be? 5 million crossings in a year? You had 2.5 million last year. 1 million gotaways? You had 500,000 last year. Crime rate tripled instead of doubled. Number one cause of death from 18 to 45-year-old Americans right now is overdose. Under your watch. What would it be? From 5 years old to 50? How would you identify failure if it's not what you've delivered thus far? By God, man. Own the moment. You've been called upon to resign by myself and others. Next year, if we have the majority in this committee, which we shall, you're still in office, you'll face impeachment. I ask you as a man, own this thing. Out of respect for you in the office, I ask you to reflect upon that. And I'll give you my remaining 45 seconds to respond. Please feel my spirit and speak truthfully. Step away from your talking points and speak to the American people and own this thing. We're losing our country down there. We need you to resign. Save the country the pain of your impeachment. I have 20 seconds, sir. Please respond.
Congressman, I couldn't disagree with you more when you state that our nation's sovereignty is disintegrating.
Well, I guess that answers that. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island for 5 minutes, Mr. Langevin.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome today. And I have a vastly different view on your service and the performance you and your people are undertaking and doing over at DHS. I thank you for your leadership. You have a lot on your plate, and probably the toughest issues to deal with outside of perhaps Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State. So I deeply appreciate everything you're doing to protect our national security. Secretary Mayorkas, I want to focus on election security right now because your department has significant responsibilities for election security, both in terms of managing the risks to election infrastructure and countering mis and disinformation that can certainly undermine Americans' confidence in the electoral process. I know that I have confidence in great leadership at CISA and Director Easterly and the work that she's doing as well. But I want to focus on the fact that Russia obviously has attempted to interfere with U.S. elections before. And I certainly believe that we absolutely have to be prepared now more than ever to redouble those efforts, given what's going on in Ukraine. That could be in retaliation for the punishing sanctions that the U.S. enacted for Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Ms. Secretary, can you tell us what the department is doing to shore up election security from Russian cyber interference, give confidence to the committee and the American people that we've got this and we are ready to protect and defend our electoral process?
Congressman, thank you very much. This is one of our priority areas. And as a matter of fact, just a few weeks ago, I engaged with secretaries of state from all over the country to focus our efforts on election security. We are building upon the great work of the former CISA director, Chris Krebs. Jen Easterly is leading, of course, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in this effort. We have just established a Mis- and Disinformation Governance Board in the Department of Homeland Security to more effectively combat this threat, not only to election security, but to our homeland security. We are disseminating information to the secretaries of state. We are counseling them and providing resources to ensure better physical security. We are addressing all aspects of election security, given, of course, the midterm elections that are upon us and the fundamental integrity of our democratic processes that is at stake.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I appreciate you outlining those steps that are being taken. They're important, of course. But let me also turn to the fact that, of course, the scope of Russian cyber threats extends beyond our elections. Also, we know that the Russian government is exploring options for potential cyber attacks against the United States and our critical infrastructure. President Biden warned against that recently and is making sure that we have all hands on deck to make sure that our critical infrastructure as well is being protected. But DHS, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency under Director Easterly, of course, plays a major role in not only securing federal networks against these threats, but also coordinating with government and private sectors to secure our critical infrastructure. So in approaching this multifaceted responsibility, DHS, through CISA, has generated innovative approaches to cybersecurity collaboration, both the interagency and the broader set of public and private sector stakeholders and the cybersecurity ecosystem. I wanted to ask, what can we expect from the department moving forward to maintain and further develop this work? And obviously, there's considerable level of variance across our critical infrastructure. For instance, certain companies have different inherent cybersecurity capacities, use different technologies, and have different levels of significance to national critical functions. How should DHS public-private partnerships account for such variances?
So there's been tremendous work underway, Congressman, in CISA under Jen Easterly's leadership. In the wake of the unprovoked and brutal Russian assault against Ukraine's sovereignty, CISA developed the Shields Up campaign, which is really an effort to disseminate information throughout the private sector with respect to the threat landscape, so that the private sector, which really houses the majority of our nation's critical infrastructure, can have its shields up, can be alert to the threat landscape, can understand the vulnerabilities that exist, and can patch those vulnerabilities and know how to do so. That shields up effort is really extraordinary and unprecedented in scope and scale. And we also have been assisted with legislation that does not in any way interfere with the voluntary public-private partnership, but does now, as you well know, given your championship of it, and Ranking Members Katko's championship of it, create a mandatory reporting regime where the federal government, best equipped to understand the Homeland Security landscape, can be informed of cyber incidents so that we can better protect the private sector.
Gentleman's time from Rhode
Thank
Island
you,
is
Mr. Secretary.
expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, within the last 2 weeks, I've taken 2 separate visits to the southwest border. One with Ranking Member Katko to El Paso, and a second a trip led by Leader McCarthy to Eagle Pass. During our trip to the border, we spoke with Border Patrol agents, local law enforcement officials, community leaders, elected officials, and everyone that we spoke to without exception said that the situation on the border is the worst that they have ever seen it. Statistics tell the same story. Last month, 221,000 encounters along the southwest border. Fox News reported that as many as 60,000 gotaways occurred last month. Just cutting that number in half, it's going to then be over 250,000 people who entered the country illegally last month. Since you have been Secretary, since the administration has taken over, we have seen that there have been more than 2.4 million encounters, a number greater than 15 of our individual states. Just looking at the last 6 months, CBP reported that they have arrested 14,150 individuals with known criminal convictions, 321 known gang members, and we know that 23 individuals were encountered who were on the terrorist watch list. Mr. Secretary, you have repeatedly lied. You've lied to Congress and you've lied to the American people when you said that the border is secure. Here in September, a hearing in which Representative Pfluger asked you this question: is the border more secure under your leadership than when you started? Your answer, Congressman, the border is secure. We're executing our plan, and I've been very clear and unequivocal in that regard. Just over a year ago, you were interviewed by ABC, Martha Raddatz. She said this: we've heard the sheriff say it, the governor say it, and the immigrants I've spoken to say it. They're coming across the border because they believe they will be welcome under the Biden administration. You yourself 3 weeks ago are not saying don't come. We're saying don't come now. President Biden had a stronger message later, but the messages are mixed at the best, Mr. Secretary. Your response: Martha, good morning. The message is quite clear. Do not come. The border is closed. The border is secure. And so my question to you, Mr. Secretary, are you testifying as you sit here today that the southwest border is secure?
Yes, I am, and we are continuing to work to make it more secure. And if I can correct one thing about the statistics you are using, and also mention one important factor. Number one, please understand that under Title 42, a Title 42 expulsion is not a formal removal under immigration law under Title 8 of the United States Code. And what happens under Title 42 is because it is an expulsion and not a formal removal, we're seeing a great deal of recidivism. So the same individual will try again to enter the United States. And so the number of encounters is different than the number of unique individuals seeking entry into the United States between the ports of entry, number one. So the encounters does not equal the number of unique individuals. Number two, the transnational criminal organizations, the smuggling networks, are spreading misinformation to vulnerable migrants that the border is open. And the reality is, the fact of the matter is, that individuals who are encountered at the border make claims for relief under our asylum laws. That is what our law provides. Those whose claims succeed in immigration enforcement proceedings have established a basis to remain in the United States. Those who do not are removed from the United States, and therefore the border is in fact not open.
Mr. Secretary, you're wrong. You're not being truthful with this committee, and you're not being truthful with the American public. I've been to the border twice within the last 2 weeks. I've spoken with CBP agents. I've spoken with elected officials. They all say the same thing. They all say that this administration has abandoned them. They say that they feel like that they are left to deal with this problem all by themselves. The border is not secure. The border is wide open. Under your leadership, this problem has only gotten worse, and in fact, this is the worst immigration crisis that our nation has ever seen. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Let me suggest to our colleagues that decorum is the order of the day, and we will enforce it accordingly. Chair recognizes.
If I may, just, Mr. Chairman, when you refer to decorum, what was the problem with the last question?
Well, just to call somebody a lie is not the decorum.
Okay, so, but you're okay with the other thing. You're just saying because of that one word you said?
I'm just saying that decorum is the order of the day.
I understand that, but by inferring that, I thought you were inferring that his line of question was out of order. I understand.
No, I
Thank you.
I did not question, I don't question any member's questions, but calling the man a lie is out of order. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this most important hearing, you and the ranking member and members of this committee for being here. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here as well. I agree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We have a major challenge at our borders. I just got back again from visiting the border. Been to El Paso many times, San Isidro many more times, and I've kind of grew up in that area. And if I can, I'm going to have the clerk show some photos I took at the San Isidro border crossing of the latest number of refugees that we have, the border crossing. Drum roll. While we get there, let me say that since my time is running, what I observed were 1,000 Ukrainian refugees coming into Tijuana on a daily basis. About 500 of them are actually passed into the U.S. under temporary protective status. And Title 42 is also being waived for them right now to come into the United States. So my question, Mr. Secretary, how do you distinguish one group of refugees from another? Why don't you do the same thing for Afghanistan, Syrians, Africans, Central Americans? I guess my question, bigger question would be, sir, what's our American refugee policy? Now I'd ask to ask my colleagues here too. The UN yesterday reported that this year 8.3 million Ukrainians will leave Ukraine. What's going to happen when we have 1 million to 2 million Ukrainians knocking at our border? And then, of course, what's going to happen, sir, when we have a few million starving Russians also knocking at our border. And the question really not for you, but for us is, what is our refugee policy in this country? We know what the law is right now, and Title 42 is really something that's been used incorrectly to address immigration at our borders, the refugee issue. This is nothing new. I just read something today that there's discussion now of a Marshall Plan for Central Europe to stabilize that region. Good idea. Why haven't we done that decades ago for Central America? If we have unstable economies that are crashing, we have challenges at the border, and those surges, gentlemen, didn't start this administration. They've been going there for 20, 30 years. Why haven't we acted on those issues? Folks come to our country the way our ancestors came to this country. Economic refugees or political refugees. So, Mr. Secretary, what is our refugee policy when we have 1 million, 2, 3 million Afghanistans, Ukrainians, Russians knocking at our borders? What's our policy? What's the solution? And I want all of us to answer that question. Or do we turn them away? Did we get the photos up? Please answer the question, sir.
Congressman, the President has spoken very powerfully about what our policy is, and that is that we are restoring...
I can address my colleagues. Here's a picture of the Ukrainian refugees at a Tijuana baseball field that the Mexican government graciously made available to these refugees.
We are restoring our leadership in the world as a country of refuge. And in fact, for the Ukrainians who have fled Ukraine in a time of brutal war, we have established a multi-part plan. Number one is our traditional refugee processing, and we deployed refugee affairs officers to the region to administer that. Number two, the Department of State issued guidance with respect to the availability of visas for Ukrainian nationals who qualify. Third, we announced this past Monday, Uniting for Ukraine, a special humanitarian parole program that requires a sponsor here in the United States, which is another lawful and orderly and humane way for Ukrainians to seek refuge in the United States. Those are three different avenues by which Ukrainians seeking refuge can actually obtain it in the United States.
Mr. Secretary, that is in the American tradition of opening our doors to those that are being persecuted, fleeing violence and war. That's what we should do. But it should not be limited just to Ukrainians, Russians, but it should be a blanket policy for the rest of the world. We need those workers. Chambers of Commerce are saying we need that workforce now.
Gentleman's time has
Thank you, Mr.
expired.
Chairman. I yield.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey for 5 minutes, Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, thanks for showing up today. When we met last March, we were beginning to see the drastic implications of the Biden administration's horrendous immigration policies. Within 45 days of you being confirmed as the Secretary of the Department, this administration has halted border wall construction that was already funded by Congress, eliminated the Remain in Mexico policy, implemented catch and release at the beginning of a global pandemic, which allowed thousands upon thousands of illegal immigrants to enter our country, canceled asylum agreements with Central American countries. Since all of these actions, America has experienced the worst immigration crisis on our record. Last month, there were over 220,000 migrant encounters at the southern border, which is almost a 30% increase from March of last year, and a 542% increase, 542%, think of that number, from March of 2020. Last month's figures brought the total number of encounters to over 2.4 million since President Biden took office. This doesn't happen by accident. Furthermore, the FY23 budget does not request funding for a new border wall and does not include a significant amount of new agent positions. In fact, Mayor Bowser's budget for Washington, D.C. requests 347 additional police officers, which is more than DHS is requesting for the entire border, which is almost 2,000 miles. CBP's mission statement is, quote, protecting American people, safeguarding our borders, and enhancing our nation's prosperity. Mr. Secretary, I am thoroughly disappointed. I am thoroughly disgusted. I am thoroughly disturbed about your performance. Just a month ago, the department announced that it was rescinding the expedited removal border policy, which helped the department effectively deport hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens. I, along with 77 other members of Congress and with the support of every Republican on this committee, wrote to you expressing adamant opposition to this decision, a letter to which I welcome a response, a timely response someday. The administration has also announced this decision to eliminate Title 42, which has allowed the department to expel over 500,000 illegal, undocumented aliens. Officials have even acknowledged that revoking Title 42 will lead to a sharp increase in illegal migrant crossings, drawing criticism and concern from Democrats and Republicans in both chambers of commerce. Officials within your department have predicted an average of 18,000 migrant crossings a day. Everybody think about that. 18,000 migrant crossings a day. I'm not saying it. It's officials within your department. 18,000. Title 42 is lifted, which is roughly 3 times the already record-setting rate you've been setting since being confirmed as Secretary. You've broken the records, Mr. Secretary. When you were asked during an interview whether you thought the administration's policies were encouraging illegal immigration, and I can't believe that you said this, you stated, I don't think that's the case at all. I don't know how you could look at us straight in the face and say that to us. I don't think that's the case at all. Just look what's going on and process it. Does this administration have a plan for border security? Does this administration have a plan for the health issues that come with all the undocumented coming over? Does this administration have a real plan for the huge increase in fentanyl and the flow of drugs? Does this administration have a plan for the huge increase in illegal crossings that are going to occur in our very near future, that are going to change the very substance, structure of our nation? How can this happen while you and the administration are failing to recognize the border crisis? I hate to say this, but I wish that you would resign. I do. I wish you would resign.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for being here. Maybe it's because I'm just coming from the funeral of Secretary Madeleine Albright, who was a refugee to this country, fleeing persecution in Europe and coming here, that it's hard to listen, frankly, here and on TV to how politicized both sides of the aisle are when it comes to the border. And I think the answer is, whether it's this administration or the last or the ones before that, our immigration system is broken. Democrats and Republicans own that. Right now, Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the White House, and have done nothing to get at comprehensive immigration reform. 4 years ago, the Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the White House, and did nothing to do comprehensive immigration reform. In Congress, we are more culpable than anyone because we are the ones who set the laws. And as a CIA officer and Pentagon official by training, if we are dealing with security issues on the very border of our country, we have failed. Our policy is failing. That is the place of last resort to protect ourselves, not the place we should be metering out who comes into our country. So I guess it just feels like whichever party is in power is going to be, should be responsible, and whoever's not in power is going to be criticizing the other side. But until we get at that root problem, we are going to have year after year these horrible pictures of our border officials having to be overwhelmed and of migrants seeking a better life living in bad conditions. 2 years ago, we all, I think every one of us on this committee, voted on a $4.5 billion supplemental. We sent active duty military to the border in addition to the Guard, and we put people in cages and separated them from their children in order to make border policy something different than it was. Now we allow people to come into the country and they go off and we have no idea whether they're ever going to show up in a courtroom again. Neither of those policies makes any sense. It is broken, but every single person here, along with the secretary, owns part of that responsibility. If you're going to criticize what's going on the border, then put forward a piece of legislation to make it better. Don't just use it as a political cudgel. Democrats and Republicans. Sorry, just going to that funeral and seeing what we can get when we have a decent immigration policy and allowing people who are fearing persecution and death legitimately to come here, and then allowing economic migrants, people like my great-grandfather who came here just for a better life, allowing them to come and work here in a vetted, legal way where they can apply from home, not shoving their way through a border. That is what we should be aiming at. Okay. The other issue where I think that the American public feels like they're not being defended is on cybersecurity. I know there's a lot that goes on, but help me understand that was a surprise to me to open up the budget that you all submitted and to see a decrease to CISA, to the organization that I tell everyone is the 911 operator to call when there's a major cybersecurity attack. Please help me understand and help the American public understand decreasing the 911 operators.
Congresswoman Slotkin, thank you very much for your words with respect to the imperative to fix what has long been a broken immigration system. The issue of CISA's funding, we have sought an increase in CISA's funding year in and year out. The President's fiscal year 2022 budget requested an increase, and the President's FY 2023 budget requested an increase over his request of 2022. The timing of it was we were not aware of the budget that would be enacted by this Congress, and we're grateful for the further plus up of CISA. But we have sought an increase in our budget as compared to our prior budget year over year. I also want to make it clear that we are continuing to expend the $650 million that we received under the American Rescue Plan, and we are significantly plussing up CISA with those funds as well. We tremendously appreciate Congress's support of that agency at a most critical time.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I was struck by my colleagues' comments and by yours earlier that this, in the direction that this is a same old problem. That's not correct. The experience we're having with illegal immigration in this country and have had since the beginning of the Biden administration is anything but same old, same old. It is historically unprecedented. It is not happening like this everywhere in the world. The premise of the Biden policy on immigration has been that it's more humane. On that premise, Secretary Mayorkas, you've released 880,000 people into the country, illegal migrants, another 600,000 gotaways, give or take. Many of those absolutely are criminals, Some are drug dealers, some are sex offenders. You can't guarantee that there aren't or that they won't commit crimes. What is your message to Americans who are going to be murdered, raped, killed by drugs, have their lives destroyed by flourishing trafficking because of your policy?
Congressman, thank you for the opportunity to answer your question. First of all, let me address your statement that it's not happening elsewhere in the world.
Well, that wasn't my question.
No, but that's
my question to you, sir, and I'd like you to answer my question rather than make your own speech, if you don't mind. What do you have to say to Americans who will suffer grievous crime, be victims of crime by virtue of people being allowed into the country and released when you need not have done so?
Individuals who enter the country are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings. They have the opportunity to make a claim for relief under the laws that this Congress has passed.
So your answer to them, your answer to the Americans who will suffer crime is that that people get to make asylum claims.
If I can finish my answer,
I'm not going to give you my time to make a long-winded answer.
No,
if you want to answer directly the question I'm asking, which is, do you have a message?
Mr. Bishop, just let him answer.
Mr. Chairman, it is my time. And I'm not going to let him filibuster me. I'm not going to let him filibuster me, Mr. Chairman.
Well, he's trying to answer your question.
If he decides he wants to go on a filibuster, then I'll just ask him another question. My question is, do you have a message to those Americans who will be victims of crime because of your policy?
That we are taking a tougher stand on criminals who have entered this country illegally. And the data suggests that. We are more focused on public safety threats, true public safety threats to the homeland than the prior administration was. And in fact, we have removed more aggravated felons and felons in 1 year than the prior administration did.
Interestingly, I
think it's almost double, actually.
In all of those actual individual categories of serious felony crimes, your numbers are lower, but somehow you have a larger number overall. It's amazing. Let me ask you this. 100,000 Americans died of overdoses last year. DEA says 95% of the fentanyl that comes in this country comes across the southwestern border. Do you feel a personal sense of remorse for those Americans who've died because fentanyl is coming in right and left across a border that is overwhelmed by illegal migration?
The fentanyl crisis has been building year in and year out, and of course we mourn the loss of individuals who've lost their lives. Do you know that in 2020 there was an approximately 50% increase in opioid deaths in this country over 2019? 2020 over 2019. The number of opioid overdose deaths in this country has grown each year, year in and year out, well prior to this administration. And what we have to do as a country is address the fundamental underlying cause, which is demand.
Sir,
and I should say also
let me ask you about the migrants
is sought to be brought into this country through the ports of entry. The great majority is through the ports of entry. Where we have interdicted.
Where your agents have been diverted to processing illegal migrants.
And we have interdicted more fentanyl.
I've got 30 seconds
2021 than we did in the prior year.
Almost 700 migrants have died on American soil in the process of entering the country. Do you feel personal remorse for their loss?
Do you realize that under the migrant protection protocols, according to a human rights organization, more than 1,500 individuals were murdered, raped, tortured, or suffered serious crimes in Mexico?
You'd rather have the 700 dead? I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri for 5 minutes, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I believe there are 33 nations in the Western Hemisphere. Is that close or wrong completely? I'm close. Is it possible for us to develop a sound immigration plan without cooperation with the nations in the Western Hemisphere, or some of them?
Congressman, it is extraordinarily difficult to do so. Migration is a challenge that is being confronted by countries throughout the region, and therefore it calls for a regional solution. That is why Secretary Blinken and I were in Panama last week to meet with leaders of multiple nations throughout the region. This is not a challenge that the United States alone is facing. As a matter of fact, contrary to the statement just articulated, Colombia, as a powerful example, has 1.8 million Venezuelans within its borders. I was in Costa Rica before I was in Panama to further advance a regional solution. And approximately 2% of the population of Costa Rica, a small country, is currently Nicaraguan by reason of the distress of people in the countries of origin. And we, of course, have to address the root causes. We have to build safe and orderly and humane pathways. We have to equip and enable countries to enforce their borders, to provide humanitarian relief where it is warranted, to repatriate individuals where it is not, and fundamentally, to Congresswoman Slotkin's important statement, we have to fix our broken immigration system.
Well, following up on her comments, I played sports in high school and college, at least the first part of college. And I am convinced that winning in sports depends in large part on whether the team plays together. If you watch basketball right now, the NBA, some of them have amazing talent. Some of them have like 4 superstars starting. And at least 2 of those teams with the superstars didn't even make the playoffs. The reason is that when a team, and in this case Congress, refuses to play together, our worth is not much more than nail fungus. And, you know, I sit here and I've never said I wanted to impeach anybody. I don't care if they're Republican, independent, vegetarian, nobody. Because what I want to do here and be able to for my grandchildren to feel good about it when they get to the age where they are interested in what's going on in the world, that we tried to make some things work. We tried to solve some problems. I told somebody earlier that I was talking about my father who's 100, turned 100. And when he came up here for my swearing in, we were walking across the street to my apartment in the Methodist building, right across the street from the Capitol. My father turned around and looked up at the dome and just started weeping. And he turned over to me and he said, man, he said, I was born in this country and I've come to the conclusion my son may be able to help solve some of the problems in our country. And I will never forget, as long as I maintain mental dexterity, my call is for us to work. We're never going to get this right unless we work together. It's easy to come in here, and even your predecessor, the Republican, I didn't scream at him or anything, because I realized it doesn't matter who's in that chair. If we don't work together, it ain't going to work.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, I have no hope that, and I'll follow decorum, Mr. Chairman. I won't say you're lying. I'll just say you're untruthful. I've called for your removal. I'll continue to call for it. What you're doing to this country through your actions are intolerable. We just heard from a Gold Star mother lunch. husband died from a terrorist. We heard from Tom Homan last night and Mark Morgan, the figures that you've all heard, particularly when Title 42 goes away, anywhere from 15 to 18,000 illegals per day. That equates to roughly 539,000, give or take, per every 30 days. That's 5 football stadiums of Carolina or Clemson. They hold roughly 79,000 under your watch. You don't know who's coming in here. You don't know, they're not being vetted, the diseases that are coming across, but it doesn't matter. There's no way that, for the statements to be made that you made that the system is broken in a way that we've never seen before, because it's very simple. You build a wall. The steel that's laying on the ground that is decaying, that's paid for, you build a wall and have an orderly entry level. You are unwilling to do that. This is an invasion of this country, and under your watch, you're allowing it. This is creating an economic crisis. This is creating a drug crisis that has been noted. In my small town alone, the fentanyl deaths are at record levels of the ones we know about. It's astounding that you really even show up today and just espouse words that have no meaning. The only thing I would say that could possibly make sense is the fact that this is something that you think is good for this country. You're an ideologue that thinks letting anybody in under any circumstance is okay. And this country will pay a price as has never before. And if, as you say, the border is more secure, what is your definition of insecure?
Congressman, you have so grotesquely mischaracterized my position on issues and my service to this country for more than 20 years.
Your actions prove different, Mr. Secretary. Your actions prove different.
I have laid out...
The fact that hold on, this is my time. The fact, and you're not going to answer questions. You're avoiding them just like you always have. You're going to accomplish your goal while you can, as long as you're in office. And come January, this is going to change with you and many others. It is my hope and my prayer. Again, a short answer. What is insecure? If we're secure in our border, what's insecure? Give me a short answer. I've got a minute and 27 seconds.
Congressman, 250,000 qualified people dedicate themselves to the mission of our Homeland Security, and that includes the brave and honorable members of the United States Border Patrol.
I've been twice, Mr. Secretary. If you talk to the Border Patrol agents, they feel like the handcuffs are on them. They are as demoralized as any group. Unlike the Vice President, unlike the President, I've been there, as many of the members on both sides of the aisle. And it's not a laughable matter. It's something that we'll pay a price for a long time. I pity the law enforcement that has to stop an illegal, not knowing where he's from, what background it is. And like has been asked, you tell that mother whose child or a relative is murdered by the criminals coming in this country. It would be interesting how you would address them by your actions under your watch.
Congressman, we will continue to execute the plan that we have devised
It's
long
no plan.
ago.
It's no plan.
We will continue to execute it, and we will intensify our efforts and address the challenges.
And let me read your statement, Mr. Secretary. When the Title 42 public health order is lifted, we anticipate migrant levels to increase. That is what you want. That is what you're anticipating, and it's a sad day for this country.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair has talked to the ranking member. We've been notified that we'll have 12 votes, and we're trying to make sure at least all our members get an opportunity to ask some questions. So we're going to pull it down from 5 minutes to 2 minutes?
Yes, sir. I
Without
think that gives
objection?
everybody an opportunity to at least say something.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Okay.
Without objection. Chair recognizes gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the Secretary for appearing today. I'm also very much in sympathy with the families of these Border Patrol agents who lost their lives. Always saddened to hear about lives lost. All life is precious. Mr. Secretary, would you just take my 2 minutes, if you would, of what's left, about a minute, 40 seconds, and explain why a wall will not solve the problem at the border, please?
Congressman, we have observed individuals bypassing the wall, intruding beyond it, cutting it, climbing over it, and the like. The border requires a layered solution to its security. The greatest force multiplier there is technology, and that is why we, in our fiscal year 2023 budget, are requesting that Congress allow us to invest further in technology. We're also seeking to resource our Border Patrol agents. We make, for the first time since 2011, a request to increase our Border Patrol forces by 300 personnel, not to mention additional case processors and the like, so that we can get our Border Patrol agents out into the field. The fact of the matter is that the border is not the right solution. The wall is not the right solution for the border. We have to harness innovation and technology as the most economic, efficient means as a force multiplier to our extraordinary personnel.
Well, I thank you for your service, and I wish I had more time to allow you to respond to some of the things that have infringed upon your character.
Gentleman's time from Texas has expired. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Secretary Mayorkas, if wall didn't work, Speaker Pelosi probably disagrees with you because we had a wall up around the Capitol for, I don't know, over 6 months or so. But just this month, the Department of Health and Human Services extended the COVID-19 public health emergency for another 90 days. As you know, only 12 days earlier, the CDC, which is a component of HHS, decided to terminate its order under Title 42. I'm on multiple pieces of legislation that would require the implementation of Title 42 until the COVID-19 public health emergency is lifted. As a physician, as a former public health official, I'm interested to know, Mr. Secretary, if Dr. Walensky or anyone from the CDC contacted you to consult with you prior to their April 1st announcement. This is a yes or no question, please.
Congresswoman, the law requires consultation, and we did consult, and what I did was provided data with respect to the number of encounters, the number
That's
of
good to hear that you're
individuals.
consulting the experts, and I'm sure you would be very willing to transmit to us all emails and phone conversations, transcripts of those conversations with the CDC. You stated in your testimony that you expect migration to increase. You've also stated that more than 18% of migrant families and 20% of unaccompanied minors who have recently crossed the U.S. border tested positive for COVID. So I find it interesting that despite these statements, you still believe that lifting Title 42 is a good idea. But moving on to another question regarding our immigration system, I visited the border 3 times being sworn in. I have heard of horror stories of children being smuggled. I have heard of the rape trees. I've heard of the cartels using children as pawns and people attempting to recycle children. In fact, one of these incidences in the RGV sector years ago, a woman and child were apprehended. The woman was then caught spitting into the child's mouth to get DNA samples. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to enter the OIG report and an article on RGV incident into the record. Mr. Mayor, Secretary Mayorkas.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. Secretary Mayorkas, as you prepare to lift Title 42 restrictions, will you use DNA testing as the last administration did to ensure familial relationships between adults and children at the border?
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, may I have 15 seconds?
Because 15 seconds.
The bounds of my consultation was that I provided data to the CDC with respect to the number of encounters, the number of individuals that a Border Patrol facility can house, how many people we were housing at a particular time, and data with respect to what we were experiencing at the border. I am not a public health expert, nor did I provide public health advice.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for your diligence and your commitment to our nation. Congress recently passed the Cyber Incident Reporting of Critical Infrastructure Act of 2021 as part of the fiscal year 2023 omnibus appropriations. The bill provides CISA with up to 3.5 years to issue a final rule that would require certain critical infrastructure owners and operators to report covered cyber incidents to CISA. First, how is DHS headquarters supporting CISA's efforts to expeditiously implement the cyber incident reporting legislation? And relatedly, how is the department working with the regulators to harmonize requirements of incident reporting frameworks? And has the Interagency Council required under the law been formed yet?
Congresswoman, thank you so much. That mandatory reporting piece of legislation is so vital to advancing our cybersecurity mission. We are engaging with the public. We are, of course, going to undertake notice of proposed rulemaking, and we already have started that process. We need to move very quickly. One of the critical issues with respect to the effectiveness of that legislation is going to be, when does that 72-hour clock begin to run? Because we don't want to experience false alarms nor unnecessarily burden private enterprises that are actually in the midst of addressing a cyber attack. So our work has already begun to advance that critical piece of legislation.
I thank you for your response. I have an additional question, but we'll get that to you in writing. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Harshbarger, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Secretary. I just returned from the southern border with several of my colleagues, and I'm extremely concerned about the situation down there. According to DHS personnel on the front lines where there's been physical barriers along the southwest border, there's been a significant decrease in drug and human smuggling as barriers serve as a deterrent and, most importantly, provide Border Patrol more time to interdict the illegal activity. Yet there's nothing in the budget request for border barrier construction. Can you tell me how much DHS has paid out or will pay out due to the fees to cancel or stop the border wall contracts? That's just a yes or no question, sir.
I can, with respect to the projects for
can
which the department itself
Can you send that
responsible.
to me since time is limited?
Yes.
If you can do that, that would be great. Do you know that there is, according to the CBP, there's generally 280 miles of border that is uncontrolled at any one point, at any day? 280 miles that is uncontrolled border.
Congresswoman, we use technology as a force multiplier to—
Well, that's just a yes or no. Did you know that?
To gain visibility of parts of the border.
That border
do
goes
not
from
have.
Atlanta to Maine, sir. That's almost the extent of the Appalachian Trail. And at any given point on any day, there's 280 miles that's uncontrolled. That's unacceptable. I'll tell you what's unacceptable in a public safety threat, and that's the seizure of 340,000 pounds of drugs, which 11,201 pounds are illicit, illegal fentanyl, which 2 grains would kill any one person in here. That's a travesty, sir. And given a 6 months notice on the removal of Title 42, don't you think that the drug cartels have just noticed to increase and change the strategy of the way they send illicit drugs across the border and human smuggling across the border?
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 2 minutes, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Border politics are pretty easy, right? You can pander to grievances, scare Americans, demonize men and women who left everything behind, carrying nothing, going to a place they don't know, make them the enemy, really fire Americans up. It's easy to demonize and weaponize that as an issue. It's a lot harder to solve it. It's a lot harder to fund opportunity and security in those countries and have right oversight on that. It's a lot harder to patrol the border and make sure that, criminals and terrorists aren't coming across. And it's a lot harder to have open arms and open hearts and open minds in America when they get here. That's hard. In 2014, 68 Republicans and Democrats in the Senate voted for a comprehensive immigration package that put 20,000 new border agents at the border. All it needed was to be voted on and passed in the House. Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the Republican Party, and his team never allowed it to come up for a vote. In effect, they defunded the police at the border. What difference would it make if you had 20,000 more border agents at the border today?
That would advance our mission to secure the border, Congressman.
No further questions. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes, Mr. Clyde.
Secretary Mayorkas, would you agree with the statement that an agency's priorities are evidenced by where it spends its money?
Yes.
Okay. All right, fine. Thank you.
To some extent, if we get the money as we
where
assess
you
it to
spend
be,
your money, that means you already have it. Okay. So looking at your budget here, looking at what I see, I'm noticing Customs and Border Protection is down $1.03 billion, a 7% decrease. I'm also seeing that you're having a Immigration and Customs Enforcement request down $400 million, a 5% decrease. Cybersecurity down $83 million, a 3% decrease. That's a total of $1.5 billion in reduction. But where I see an increase is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, a 55% increase of over $250 million, an increase. So it appears to me that we're seeing the effect of your policies right here. And it's called the border crisis. 221,000 encounters in March of 2022, 28% increase from March of 2021, a 542% increase from March of 2020. This is the highest number of monthly encounters in the last 2 decades. Border security is national security, correct, sir?
it is a
It is,
a
okay.
part
Great.
of.
So this is your report card. This is your job review. And we are seeing the effect of your priorities by a massive increase in the number of illegal encounters at the border. These priorities are not securing the border. These are focused on increasing illegal alien processing. That's what I see from your budget. And then for you to tell our ranking member that you will not lose operational control of the border, you've lost it already, sir. 700,000 gotaways last year alone, and you say our border is secure? I disagree with you, sir. And I yield back.
Time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada for 2 minutes, Ms. Titus.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go back to the point that was made by Mr. Langevin about election security. CISA provides a lot of services free to state and local governments so that they can use those services and resources to reduce both cyber and physical risk to our election systems. The election system has been designated as part of critical infrastructure. And yet, if you look at the budget, that infrastructure research lacks funding from the Science and Technology Directorate. I wonder if there are any plans or any funding opportunities through the Centers of Excellence program to allow the Science and Technology Division to work with universities or other organizations so we can leverage what DHS does invest to try to be sure our election systems are safe and free from attack.
Congresswoman, we are integrating the work of science and technology in everything that we do. One of our organizational priorities that I set out for the department is to actually harness technology and innovation. And the Office of Science and Technology has a seat at the leadership table more than they ever have. And we are indeed using their extraordinary expertise in varied mission sets, including in election security.
Well, I hope you'll reach out to some of our universities. I know UNLV has a major program in cyber technology, cyber protection, and I think they'd be able to contribute maybe to some of our some of your efforts here or some of those centers where they're focused on terrorism as well as on elections?
Most certainly, Congresswoman, and we'd be pleased to follow up with you in terms of the specifics of how we can most effectively do so.
That'd be great. Thank you. And I'll pass that word on to UNLV. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And since I only have 2 minutes, I guess I'll run through this. I've been to the border 3 times and spoken to a number of Customs and Border Protection agents, and every single one of them has said in order for them to do their job, they needed that wall to be constructed. They needed the policies that were in place during the Trump administration to be reinstated, and they needed more people. Every single one of them, and I've been there 3 times. And so, Mr. Secretary, one of the first acts that the President Biden did was he stopped construction of the wall. One of the also first things that he did, he stopped he reversed all the Trump era policies. Isn't it a fact that by doing that, you've actually, the Biden administration and your administration of the Biden administration's policies have actually contributed to this 5-fold increase in the number of people that we've encountered at the border since March of 2020?
Congressman Jimenez, I would disagree with that. And if one takes a look at the landscape across the region, one would understand.
Okay, you disagree. That's good. That's
challenges of.
Excuse me. You disagree. That's great. Okay, I got it. All right. So I got 2 more questions. How many people that are actually crossing the border are asking for asylum from Mexico?
I can provide that data. It'll take me a minute, but if you'd like, Congressman,
Well,
I can follow up.
I can tell you that in March in 2020 it was 5%. So it's only 5% of the people are actually asking for asylum from Mexico. Wouldn't it be wiser to return the rest of them back to Mexico and go back to Mexico and not relieve Mexico of its obligations to control its border and disincentivize other people from coming across our border? I think that would be a logical step. And then, so if that's the case, why is the administration fighting the return back to Mexico policy?
Oh, Congressman, individuals who do not qualify for relief under our laws are removed from the United States. Individuals who make those claims in immigration enforcement proceedings. So individuals who do not have a basis to stay are in fact removed.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. I wanted to talk a little about the TSA proposal in your budget. I appreciate the increase that you're asking for. I recognize that is to make these support these positions and make them more viable in terms of how much they're paid, et cetera. I also know that you are in favor of expanding bargaining rights because they've had very limited access to determining their plight and fighting for their rights. So my question to you is exactly what are you all proposing in terms of the expanding of the collective bargaining rights? And number 2, since we wouldn't want another administration to be able to turn over the good work that you're doing, will you be willing to support Mr. Thompson's bill H903, which would codify some of these things that we find so necessary for the TSOs?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. I announced last year our commitment to the personnel of TSA to provide them with pay commensurate with their federal colleagues throughout the federal government, and also to provide them with collective bargaining rights. In the President's fiscal year 2023 budget, we are seeking appropriations to fund both of those efforts. In fact, $871 million to address the disparity in pay that is inequitable for our wonderful frontline personnel, and approximately $120 million to fund the collective bargaining rights so that they have the rights that so many others have.
Secretary, I try to acknowledge that as a good thing. Could you just tell me yes or no if you'd be able to support legislation that would codify these good things we want on behalf of those so deserving employees.
We would, and we've been working with the chairman's office in that regard.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida for 2 minutes, Ms. Kamek.
All right, my time has been cut in half, so I'll just jump right in. Mr. Chairman, first I ask unanimous consent that this letter from the Republican Study Committee from 133 different members be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Secretary Mayorkas, we asked for a response to the questions posed in this letter within the next 30 days. Yes or no? Will you commit to giving us an answer within 30 days?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Secretary Mayorkas, according to a 2021 ICE report, there was a significant drop in the number of arrests and deportations of illegal immigrants by ICE officers compared to previous years. You can see from this graphic behind me that, Mr. Chairman, and I want to ask that we, through unanimous consent, enter this into the record as well.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. So you can see clearly that there is a clear discrepancy. Secretary Mayorkas, do you believe in following the laws of the United States? Yes or no?
So I can't see that chart, but of course I do, Congresswoman.
Okay. So do you believe that if an individual or a group of individuals breaks the laws of the United States, that they should be arrested? Yes or no?
I do.
So if an individual is found to have crossed the border illegally, do you believe that the United States should exercise its right to arrest and deport that individual? Yes or no?
I do, but not at the expense of
All right, I'm going to reclaim my time because it's been cut in half. Also, I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a response, a formal response from the National Border Patrol Council to your 6-pillar plan in which I quote, "You lie." This is from your Border Patrol agents.
So,
without objection, so ordered.
Congresswoman,
you were not here, but calling anybody a lie is not.
Mr.
Chairman, this is a quote from the Border Patrol Council.
Oh, okay.
So Congresswoman, if I could address your point of arrest.
Mr. Secretary, I apologize. I have to reclaim my time. And I know in the past, in the last 3 encounters you and I have had, you've called me rude and disrespectful. I won't do the same to you. But I do want to get to the bottom of something very, very important. FEMA has allocated and appropriated $130 million for the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. That money has been spent on illegals in housing and transporting them around the United States. I would request a full audit. Can you commit to that, yes or no?
Gentleman can answer, Secretary, answer the question.
I'm sorry?
Answer the question.
Ma'am, Congresswoman, I'd be very pleased to conduct an audit of the manner in which those funds have been spent. They've been spent according to their statutory authorities.
Thank you. I've asked 3 times, so maybe the 4th time is the charm. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes gentlelady from New York for 2 minutes, Ms. Rice. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Dimmons, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for showing up because we haven't always seen that. Look, we all want to keep dangerous people out of the United States, but the bottom line is our system is broken. It has been broken for a while, and I really do believe that we could fix it if we could get politics out of our way. So I'm going to transition from the border with the limited time that I have. I associate myself with the remarks from Ms. Slotkin because she's absolutely correct and spot on there. But Secretary, could you tell us a little bit about the future of the URASI program as it pertains to law enforcement agencies specifically?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So the Urban Area Security Initiative grant program is a fundamentally important way to resource state and local law enforcement to address the national security priority areas and other homeland security threats that local communities face. So it's a way of equipping and resourcing local law enforcement.
And we have seen reductions to that program, though, so I'd like you to just talk about the future of it, where we're going, because they are, as you well know, the first line of defense in all of our communities.
They most certainly are, and thank you for your service in that regard, Congresswoman. So we have been engaging extensively with local law enforcement to make sure that the UASI grant program really meets the urgency of the moment and serves local law enforcement most adeptly, to give them greater latitude with respect to how they spend their funds, to increase the amount of funds dedicated to terrorism prevention activities that are conducted by local law enforcement. So we're looking at the UASI grant program and driving efficiency and effectiveness of it.
You know, it's many cities fall off of the list with absolutely no notice. Could you talk a little bit about better planning to prevent that, or at least telegraph to them that they're no longer receive the funding?
So it's a very challenging issue, Congresswoman, because the money is year to year, and it doesn't really institutionalize stability of spending and predictability of funding to really invest in law enforcement. But we're working in those parameters, the parameters of the program now.
Young lady's time has expired.
Try to make the most of that grant program.
Chair recognizes the gentleman
Thank you.
from Kansas, Mr. LaTurner, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for being here today. The FY23 DHS budget for ICE includes a significant increase for the Alternatives to Detention program, which will accommodate 170,000 participants. Do you really believe that mass releasing those who illegally cross our borders does not send the wrong message to human smugglers, cartels, and migrants? Isn't this yet another message by this administration that the U.S. will not enforce our immigration laws?
No, that is not the message at all. The individuals are in immigration enforcement proceedings, and if their claims for relief under the laws of the United States are not successful, they are subject to removal. And the appearance rate of individuals on our Alternatives to Detention program have in fact increased. And I should, if I may, respond to the Congresswoman's point, because individuals who have entered in between the ports of entry, who make a claim for relief under our laws, under the asylum laws that Congress has passed, have a right to actually vindicate those claims in an immigration court. And while the number of arrests might have diminished, the number of serious felons that have been arrested have increased. And we have exercised our prosecutorial discretion to focus on the greatest public safety threats, realizing that we do not have the resources, nor should we seek to remove 12 million undocumented individuals in the United States, many of whom have been contributing members of our country.
Secretary, the message that this administration has sent time and again is that our borders are wide open. The Border Patrol needs support from you that they're not getting right now. And this program, without question, is another message that the borders are wide open, come on in. And this is after the issues with Title 42.
Congressman, I respectfully disagree with you. Our message has been clear that the border is in fact not open. Those who enter illegally, who do not have a valid claim to remain in the United States are
Secretary,
removed.
as you know, you set a record last year and you're going to do it again this year, and that's because of your failed leadership on this issue. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Can you help clarify where are drugs coming in from?
The drugs are coming in from different countries of origin. They are coming in through the southern border, or the people try to bring them in through the southern border, and the majority are sought to be transported illegally through the ports of entry.
Thank you.
Which is why we have used non-intrusive technology, forward operating laboratories to increase our success in interdicting illegal substances, and the data reflects our success with an increase in those interdictions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Fentanyl seizures increased to the numbers we are seeing now under the Trump administration. So for those of us who want to talk straight to the American people, no mention of that. But the numbers were, in fact, the highest per month under the Trump administration in October 2021. Mr. Secretary, we've heard allegations of people being liars and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, members can also say things that are inaccurate and lies as well. So let's try to clear some of them up right now. Is the border open? Is the border wide open?
The border is not open.
And will the border be open and wide open when Title 42 is lifted?
It will not be, and we are planning, as I articulated publicly yesterday, since September of 2021, to prepare for the eventuality that Title 42 would no longer be in place under the CDC's authority.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk about what failure at the border looks like. Let me tell you what I think failure at the border looks like. Failure at the border looks like when kids were dying under the prior administration. Failure looks like when kids and women and children are being raped because of this inhumane process of policy of Remain in Mexico that you all think is perfectly fine, that the other side of the aisle thinks is perfectly fine. Okay? So Mr. Chairman, my colleague said Remain in Mexico, no problem with the
Chairman,
policy.
I'm going to object because she's directing her discussion directly to the members. I think that's inappropriate.
Just because I'm looking at you, you all said it. Just because I'm looking at you doesn't mean it's inappropriate.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
I yield back.
Chair recognizes gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Meyer, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, in February of this year, I introduced a resolution of inquiry with the support of 39 of my Republican colleagues requesting all documentation in DHS's possession regarding border policies be transmitted to Congress. I did this because in the midst of this crisis, we have not seen transparency with the American people or Congress about the situation at the border, about the policies, about how things have changed. My colleague, Ms. Kamek, referenced some of the behind closed doors meetings that, the contents of which have come out, in which we're hearing a very different message. And I think it's vital, and I'm sure you agree as well, that we get on the same page and have a sense of that transparency. Because with respect to some of the others who have offered comments, there's no doubt that we're facing an unprecedented crisis on our southwest border. The number of encounters alone is staggering. And we need DHS to help uphold our nation's laws. We need DHS to support our frontline law enforcement personnel. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit the resolution in question for the record, and I do hope my majority colleagues will allow us to mark up this vital tool and give the American citizens a complete understanding of just how this administration has handled the crisis at the border. But, Mr.
Are you submitting something for consideration?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
But Secretary Mayorkas, on March 31, 2022, DHS announced with the Department of Labor, the administration plans to make an additional 35,000 H-2B temporary non-agricultural worker visas available for the second half of fiscal year 2022. We are almost in May, already in the busy season when many of the American employers and businesses rely on these temporary workers. And I know this is something we have discussed several times. I believe I've asked you about every single time you've come before this committee hearing. So why is this process taking so long? When can the businesses that depend on this program expect for these visas to finally be available?
So, Congressman, appreciate your support of the H-2B visa program. We are aiming to promulgate the regulation that will allow those supplemental visas to be issued within the next 2 weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey for 2 minutes, Mr. Gottheimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us today. I recently introduced the bipartisan Bicameral Invest to Protect Act to invest in local law enforcement departments and ensure that police officers in smaller communities across the country have the resources and training they need to keep themselves and our communities safe. I'm aware that many ICE Homeland Security Investigations task forces operate in and collaborate with and rely on local police departments to support their investigations. How important is it that we continue to focus on investing in law enforcement at the local level, like what my new legislation will do? And do you believe that they have everything they need right now to protect our communities, especially as local law enforcement officers work with your department to protect our homeland from terrorists?
Congressman, it's vitally important that local law enforcement be fully resourced and equipped to protect their respective communities. We've been employing the task force model very successfully. Homeland Security Investigations is one of the agencies that has been doing so. The United States Secret Service works very closely with local law enforcement as well, and those resources are extraordinarily effective, and those tools that we employ are extraordinarily effective in keeping the communities safe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. And one other question. The Port of New Jersey and New York is an important New Jersey and the entire eastern seaboard. I'm hearing from many of my businesses who operate not just in the port off of New York and New Jersey, but also on the Houston and some of the other ports, and there's delays caused by U.S. Customs and Border Protection's inspection process. There's not enough agents, especially to handle some of the larger ships that come in. Do you know anything about this, and is that something you can look into to make sure that we have more flow of commerce, which obviously affects the supply chain and costs, and to address any unnecessary delays that are going on right now?
So one of our primary obligations, of course, in the Department of Homeland Security is to make sure that illegal contraband doesn't enter our country. That is true through the seaports, and that is why U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Office of Field Operations inspects cargo before it is allowed to enter the United States. I am not aware of the...
There's no shortages, right?
Gentleman's time has expired. We got three more people. I'm trying to...
Thank you.
Chair recognizes gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fluger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, this is one of the most shameful hearings I've ever seen. The American public's not fooled by the comments that the border is secure. It's not. The 9/11 Commission said that the system was literally blinking red in the months that led up to 9/11. I am worried about a terrorist attack, and yet Press Secretary Psaki has said that it's no big deal that we had 23 encounters last year and 27 encounters with people who have popped positive on the terror database. Do you agree with the press secretary it's not a big deal?
The press secretary didn't say it's not a big deal. And
she said that it's only a couple of dozen people, not that big deal, not that big of a deal.
Congressman, it is our fundamental responsibility to protect
Do you
and
agree
safeguard the American
with the press
people.
Secretary, Mr. Secretary, do you agree with the press secretary saying that it is not that big of a deal, that it's very common, and it's a few dozen at most?
Congressman, we take our obligation to secure the homeland quite seriously, and it is our job to interdict individuals whether they appear on the TSDB or not.
From 2017 to 2020, the average number of encounters was about 550,000 people, yet this year we already have 300,000 known gotaways. That is going to double before the end of the year. That's 6 months. You have literally, with the number of gotaways, matched 2017 to 2021. Mr. Secretary, is the department planning on using Goodfellow Air Force Base to house 500 or more illegal immigrants, illegal aliens?
Congressman, I'll have to get back to you.
You're the Secretary of DHS. This is your responsibility. You have just told us that you're in control, that you have operational control of the border. Are you planning to use Goodfellow Air Force Base to house illegal immigrants?
Congressman, I will ask my colleagues with respect to the status of those particular plans and respond to your questions.
The administration has literally abdicated their responsibility to keep Texas and the United States safe. I am begging you to secure the border now.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres, for 2 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, the New York State healthcare system was hit the earliest and hardest by COVID-19, which left a death toll of more than 67,000 New Yorkers and a cost of untold billions. COVID-19 has put unprecedented strain on the healthcare system, and the delay in FEMA's COVID-19 reimbursement has only served to compound the crisis. FEMA owes New York State healthcare providers billions of dollars in reimbursements. Montefiore, which is the largest healthcare provider in the Bronx, is waiting for $31 million to be obligated by FEMA. On February 17, 2022, the entire congressional delegation of New York, both Democrats and Republicans, sent a bipartisan letter calling for a rapid distribution of FEMA public assistance program funds. The letter, which was signed by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, was sent in mid-February. In the 2 months since then, there has been no response from FEMA. Mr. Secretary, can you see to it that that FEMA responds to our request as soon as possible?
I most certainly will, Congressman. I should say that FEMA has done an extraordinary job in setting up vaccination centers throughout the country, including in your jurisdiction. I visited one of them, Medgar Evers College, because such a tremendous focus on reaching otherwise disenfranchised communities and making vaccines accessible. The point of reimbursement is a very important one, and I will follow up on it.
And I just want to quickly on Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico saw a massive power outage that led to the loss of electricity for hundreds of thousands. And if the kind of repeat power failures in Puerto Rico were happening anywhere else in the United States, it would never be tolerated. And in my estimation, the chronic breakdown of the electric grid in Puerto Rico points to a broader breakdown of American democracy. Puerto Rico has long been relegated to the status of a colony, and Puerto Ricans on the islands have long been relegated to the status of second-class citizens who have been deprived of something as basic as reliable electricity. My question to you is, what role can DHS play in expediting the rebuilding of Puerto Rico's electric grid, which has become a national emergency?
So, Mr. Pierre Luisi, of Puerto Rico and I have discussed one issue specifically, Congressman, and that is Puerto Rico's need for additional labor. And so we're taking a look at the H-2B program and how that infusion of labor resources could actually assist Puerto Rico in rebuilding. We're also looking and exploring at other avenues to address the labor issues specifically.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gavarino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being here today. I wish I had more than 2 minutes, because first I had a lot of cyber questions that I wanted to ask, but how, with everything going on right now, internationally, all the cyber attacks that we're facing, how is the administration requesting less money for this budget than what was received by CISA last year? I think it's $100 million less.
Congressman, we're asking for more funds than we asked in our President's fiscal year 22 budget, and this is an issue of timing, as I explained earlier, with respect to the preparation of our budget for fiscal year 23 vis-a-vis the publication of the 22 enacted budget.
What is DHS's goal for CISA? Was it $5 billion? What would the goal over the next 5 years like you to?
We are eager, and the ranking member Katko and I have spoken about resourcing FEMA CISA. We are eager to resource CISA as quickly as we can absorb the funds that we received and use them efficiently.
Okay, I just have to second what my colleague, Mr. Katko, said. With what is happening internationally, what other countries are spending on their cyber, we need to make sure we double down and CISA gets every resource that it actually needs to protect us. But I want to switch over. I know a lot of people have been talking about the border, so I do want to ask a question. The budget here, DH's budget, decreases ICE's adult average daily population beds by the detention beds by 5,000. It was 30,000. It's dropping down to 25,000. We're currently seeing the highest record numbers. You know, my district's been hit by, I have been victims of violence from MS-13 gang members. Why are we decreasing the amount of facility beds?
So Congressman, historically, the detention beds have not been used effectively. We are emphasizing the use of alternatives to detention. We're seeing high appearance rate in court proceedings through ATD. We use the acronym to describe it.
Are they? Oh, am I out of time?
I'm gonna give you. Since you're the last person.
Thank you. Are these beds not being used now?
Oh no, they're being used with their use is limited by a number of factors. Number one, the CDC guidelines and the imposition of social distancing. Number two, quite frankly, labor shortages and finding people to work in those detention facilities. But really what we are using detention for is the individuals who need to be detained because of public safety issues, border security, and national security issues. And then the other source and focus of detention, in addition to public safety, is making sure that people appear for their immigration proceedings, and we have separate and independent efforts underway to achieve that.
With all the people coming, I think we should.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, I thank you for your testimony and the members for all their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. The chair reminds members that the committee record will remain open for 10 business days. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.